Okay, thank you very much for being here, and I'm sure everybody knows already your Nobel Prize and your awards. But this conversation is about your upbringing and the lessons that you have, been collecting all along the way. So I wanted to start by the beginning, but your upbringing in Lebanon, being a son of Armenian fathers. We know Armenia has a very painful story with the genocide from Turkey, from Turkey, and so I wanted to ask you about your childhood, how normal it was, giving giving that background and giving that Lebanon was in the middle of the civil war.
Hello, thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure being here. Yes, so I am of Armenian origin, and I was born in Lebanon. It's kind of a complicated background because we were really brought up as Armenian. So my native tongue was Armenian. I went to an Armenian school, and yet Lebanon was very generous to accept all these Armenian refugees during the World War, when the Armenian genocide happened. And so I was about 8 years old when the civil war in Lebanon started. So, everyone that I meet that's been to Lebanon says, "Oh, what a beautiful country," and it is. But my memories are very from the war-torn state, and so. But it's funny. Humans are very resilient. They get adjusted to things, and so, although when I describe my childhood to most people, they would think it's very difficult and stressful. You get into this normalcy of what you expect, and so although there were bombs and we couldn't go out at night, and but we got used to it and we enjoyed life just as well. There's lots of great memories too of exploring the outdoors and having Middle Eastern food. Lebanese food is great, so I still miss that. But I think probably it really taught me resilience. I think that's a main message I would take out of it, is that if you can survive that, you can pretty much survive lots of things. So that's the big advantage, I guess, of growing up in an environment like that.
And I understand that you entertained the idea of becoming a writer in the first place. Is that right?
So my dad is an accountant. He worked for an airline company, but his passion was writing. So he has written plays, novels.
Wow.
It's quite well known within the Armenian community, not outside of it. And so, of course, many kids try to replicate what their dad does. So I wrote some poetry and things early on. But my parents had brainwashed me mainly to become a medical doctor. Maybe it's like here in this culture too, every family needs a doctor. And my brother and my sister were both very queasy, like they couldn't see cockroach. And I was very brave with cockroaches. So they thought, okay, this is the guy who's going to become a medical doctor. And so that was my plan for a long time.
And when did you change?
So I immigrated to the United States when I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
And
did you have acquaintances, family there?
So my mom's sister was in Wisconsin area for a long time. So that's why we had a green card to be able to immigrate. So when I got there, first I continued my pre-medical college studies, and I was going to UCLA in Los Angeles, and the school was very large. So my science classes, there was like 200-300 people in the classroom, and I knew to get into medical school you needed a letter of recommendation from your professors, and I wasn't meeting them because the class was so large. So I decided to work in a laboratory just to get a letter of recommendation. So it was a scam. But it kind of, as soon as I start working in a lab, I absolutely loved it. I loved doing science. I loved the lab culture.
And what was your first topic of research?
So I worked in a laboratory that studies the tiny fruit fly.
Okay.
And it's a great model to study developmental biology of how you go from a single cell to a complex organism with brain cells and muscles, etc. And so we were studying the very early stages of how one uniform cell starts dividing and then starts becoming, the first decision is where's the head and where's the tail going to be. And so we studied that question of how does polarity in an organism occur early in embryogenesis.
And then you decided you were going to be a researcher.
That's right.
And when did you, or how were you, choosing or selecting your line of research?
Yeah, that's a question. That's a very important question for scientists.
Yeah.
And I think at that point I had no idea. I was kind of going with the flow. Whatever information I had, this is what people do. If you learn something, then you start wanting to do more of it. And so I was studying this, molecules that decide cell fate. So at first I thought I would do the same thing instead of in flies in mice. So what I study has always evolved. And in science, actually, we really, really encourage people to change fields. And I think it's such an important thing because I compare it culturally to immigration. You're in one place, you know it well, you can get very comfortable. But if you are taken to another environment, you first have a very steep learning curve because you're learning new things. But you bring with you everything you've learned.
Yeah.
And you can sometimes apply what you've learned to a new field. And I think a lot of my success in science has happened at times when I've switched fields. When you, as I said, translate one type of knowledge to another. And again, that's very similar to immigrant story, where you go from one culture place to another, and you look at things differently, and you say, this is great, they do things differently here, but maybe I can apply what I know to one of these kind of topics. And in science, it's, again, very, very similar. And I've changed topics all the time. Now what drives me is finding the most interesting open questions. Right? Science is about finding new discoveries. And once you know the literature, what's known, then you start knowing what's unknown. And then you have to ask the important question, are the tools around good enough to answer this open question? And the intersection of those two things, big question and practicality of, can I do this in the next 5-10 years, is what drives my research area.
And so we're going back to the immigrant issue, but first you talked about the tools, and now we are in the middle of a revolution of tools, if you will, with AI. And I know that there's one particular development that it's been very helpful for you, that it's AlphaFold. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so yesterday I showed what we call the structure of a protein. The DNA is translated to protein. Protein is made out of an alphabet of 20 letters. So when we sequenced the human genome, we knew what protein's language words were in a way. But those are just letters. How proteins do things is they fold in a very specific shape, and that shape dictates function. So I talked about an ion channel, which sits and then either closes and opens. When it opens, ions go through it. So that's the structure that one needs to know. So before AlphaFold, which I'll talk about in a second, in the last 20 years, this has been a huge revolution in how quickly we can understand the structure of a protein. And in the old days, it used to take 5 to 10 years to decide the structure of one protein. And then technology got better. You could do it in 1 year. And now, this was the Nobel Prize in Chemistry last year, just using artificial intelligence and in silico computer analysis, you can just put in any sequence of the protein and it pops up the structure. It's 99% correct. You still have to confirm it once in a while. But the idea that what used to take 5 years now takes minutes is mind-boggling. And all of this is happening in my scientific lifetime, right? Less than 20 years. And so other than this is helpful for curiosity-driven science, this is very helpful for what we call drug discovery, which is translating the basic understanding of science into the future medicines. Again, this accelerates this and many other aspects of drug discovery, finding the future medicines.
And if we think that that may be happening as we speak in thousands of laboratories, it's really a revolution, no?
It is. It is. I think the biomedicine has been very exciting, and some people call this the golden state. Because it's just so much technology transforming how to do science more quickly, more efficiently, and hopefully this will translate into better understanding of life and disease.
So tell us a little about how did you end up researching in the line that took you to get the Nobel Prize, in the line of I don't know if it was pain, if it was the sensory system. What drove you in the first place in that direction?
So I kind of mentioned early in my career, I was studying this idea of embryogenesis, which is how does one cell decide to become a muscle cell or a neuron. And then I was studying how these peripheral nervous system neurons develop during embryogenesis. But then I realized one day that this is very interesting, but you know what's more interesting is how they function. Because as I said yesterday, most cells in our bodies communicate by chemicals. So insulin, for example, you all know is a hormone that's a chemical, complex chemical. So cells can secrete one protein that goes to another. We know a lot about all this. But if you look at the sensory biology, which is how we communicate with the rest of the world, also I mentioned yesterday, we understood how you see, how you smell, how you taste, but how we sense touch was completely not understood. And this is what I call a big unanswered question that was related to what I was doing. And although my main interest was just curiosity, how do you do this? How do you transform pressure into a chemical or electrical signal? That by itself is very interesting to me. But of course, I also know that finding these molecules could lead to medicines for pain. And so that also is an important part of why we study what we study.
So would you say that you're a little bit impatient about it? I mean, about being your basic science applied to therapies? Do you have that drive too?
I do, but I also realize that it takes a large team to do this. So, my main job in a research institute or university is to make findings that are, just biologically important. And although we contribute to this, but there are lots of biotechnology companies, pharmaceutical companies that actually do the very hard work of finding the drugs, doing clinical trials. And as researchers, we can't do all of that. So I would say I'm actually very patient in science because you have to be. Science is, in a way, still slow. There's hope that it gets faster. There's lots of failure in science. When we do experiments, I show all the things that work beautifully, but 9 out of 10 experiments don't work, and it's kind of very frustrating. And so you have to be patient. You have to have a certain mindset that can take failure again and again. I talked about my postdoctoral fellow, this guy had a PhD and was doing more training in my lab, who did this experiment and did not have any positive results for a whole year, but he kept doing it. And so if he wasn't very patient and resilient, this would not have been discovered. And so I think being patient is very important in science.
So, and when you arrived to your main discovery, did you know that you were in that stage, or were you, having to check 1,000 times, and how is that moment?
So definitely eureka moment when Bertrand, after 1 year of looking at all these candidates, number 72 finally did what we were doing. He's a very calm guy, so he came into my office and says, "Ardem, I got it." and so we went and looked very exciting. But it's a two different answers. One is big moment, yes, but in a way after that it took 5 to 10 years to understand its importance. So immediately we had hopes that we had found something very exciting, but the full fruition of how important it is for physiology and disease came after all the genetic studies I talked about yesterday. And if I'm going to be honest, I would say it ended up being more important than we initially thought.
And I've heard you tell this story, but I wanted to share with the public, because it's very funny how when you won the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Commission was calling you, and you had your phone turned off, and they ended up calling your father.
Yeah, it is a in a way wonderful story for me, because I got to hear it from my father.
Yeah.
So Sweden, it's the only prize left, I think, that you have no in advance notice. So it's a complete surprise the day of, and when they announce it, in our time zones, it's 2 a.m, and so some people expect to win the Nobel Prize, which I was trying very hard not to be one of those people. So I have do not disturb on my phone, and I didn't change it. Because you kind of know when they're going to announce it. And so they had called me 3 times and left messages, and it was getting very close to the time that they were going to announce to the public. And they were very good in internet searching and finding another Patapoutian in California. And they called my father, who was 94 years old at the time. He's 97 now, still doing well. And he was awake at 2 a.m. I don't know why, but the guy later told me that my dad yelled at him for calling so late. But pretty soon figured out what was going on, and then he was able to contact me. I don't know if you guys know, but on iPhone, if you have favorites, if they call you a couple of times, they go through for emergency purposes, I guess. So he called me, he said something's going on from Stockholm. And when I checked my phone, there were 3 messages from the head of the Physiology and Medicine Committee. So I called him, and it was literally minutes before they were going to announce it. So ended up being a very special moment to hear it from my dad.
And what happened? Yeah. So what happens the day after, when you go back to the lab? I guess you had a big celebration and everything, but with the daily work after you have won the Nobel Prize?
I'll start with the day after. I think, this was during COVID, 2021. Wow. And so usually as soon as this happened, news, trucks come to your house and all of this. So none of that was happening. We just, they say the phone rings constantly, and it does. Like within 1 hour, I think I talked to a bunch of the major newspapers and TV stations, and then we had a Zoom kind of news conference type thing, and it's a blur. I don't actually remember too much now, but it was one thing that was interesting is you don't even think about this, but one of the people from the Nobel said, "Can you take a picture of yourself right now as you're hearing this news?" And so my wife Nancy, who's in the audience, she woke up my son, and he came into the bed, and I have my laptop open. We're trying to follow the news, and she took this picture that they asked for, and then we posted it on social media, and it was kind of total COVID times, where that was the way I communicated with my community, and that was kind of the medium of communication instead of being out in the open. And so the actual ceremonies for 2021, where I got my medal, happened in Irvine, California, instead of Stockholm, Sweden, and got it from the Swedish ambassador to United States instead of the king. So not as good, but the Nobel Committee was nice enough to invite us all 3 years worth of Nobel laureates to go the following year. So we had a great party, and it was good. Life does change after your Nobel, and there are two kinds of ways to approach this. You know, you get a lot more attention, a lot more emails, a lot more invitations like this, you know, my instinct was initially that I should just keep doing my science, not get distracted, because for Nobel laureates, if I say so myself, I'm on the younger side, so a lot of people get it during retirement.
Yeah.
And I still doing science that I really like and enjoy, and so I want to keep the focus on it. So for example, I have a rule that I say yes to 12 invites a year, and that's it. And so after I reach 12, I say no.
We were lucky in here. Yeah.
And so that I have enough time to do studies in my lab. But you know, a few things happened that made me realize that hiding in the lab after this is not the best thing to do. And one of them was I got handwritten letters from elementary school kids, some Armenian kids from LA, who wrote such warm things saying...
There's a big community of Armenians in LA, right?
Yes, big part of diaspora is there. And the letters said things like, you know, I never thought I could be a scientist, but you look like me, so maybe I can do it. And so when you hear things like that, you realize that Nobel allows you to kind of have a message to importance of doing science and why it benefits society. And I think it would be a mistake to completely ignore this and hide in the lab. So I'm trying to balance the two.
Let's talk about being an immigrant, as an immigrant scientist, and what's happening right now in the U.S. With the not only with the you know grants and everything being restricted or definitely cut, but also the anti-immigrant not only speech, but you know the measures that are being taken against international students, even Middle Eastern scientists with green card and everything are being turned away from the airports, are having a lot of trouble in doing their work, no less. I understand that some countries in Europe are actually developing plans to attract all those talent that feel no longer welcomed in the U.S., where you know people like you have developed their best or all of their work that is in benefit of all humanity. So how do you feel about that and about you know transmitting all these messages of resilience and the values of being an immigrant for a whole community when this is happening at the same time?
Yes, so I just a couple of weeks ago I wrote an opinion piece that was published in CNN exactly about this, to talk about my point of view and my take on what's going on. I mean, to me, logically, it makes very little sense why we would do this. In theory, I talked about why immigrants and immigration mentality is important. And if you just look at the United States, I forgot the exact number, so don't quote me on it, but something like 60% of Nobel laureates from America, USA, are immigrants. And so, that number tells you that you know, it's an important part of society. But maybe we need to take a step back and say, it doesn't matter. Who cares about Nobel laureates? Like, maybe that's the first thing to do. And I think it's so important for politicians and the public to understand how science works, to understand the importance of basic science. So when someone hears grants are being cut, doesn't mean maybe anything to them.
Yeah.
But if you explain to them that if this doesn't happen, in 10 years you won't get the next medicines, maybe they'll understand. And not just health benefits, the government investment in research in the United States economically is a great idea, because there are studies that show that every dollar that the NIH, our National Institute of Health, spends, $3 goes back to the economy. Because we do the research, we start a biotech, which then grows more, you hire more people. So it's good for health, it's good for the economy. So to me, it doesn't make any sense to do this. The logic given is that they're trying to be more efficient, but from what I see, nothing's being done about efficiency. So I don't really understand, and I don't want to be too political, but I think for me, what I can do is educate the public and talk to my politicians' representatives, and both Democrats and especially Republicans who are in charge of the Congress right now, is to make sure they understand what's happening, because a lot of times there's so much misinformation.
Yeah, excuse me, is this your first trip abroad since you wrote the op-ed?
Yes, it is actually. I'm a U.S. citizen, so but many people told me when I wrote this CNN opinion piece that don't do it, there might be retaliation. But I feel like if I don't speak out, who's going to speak out, right? And I mean, you mentioned other countries. I immediately got offers from China, who offered me 20 years of funding if I came. I got in touch with someone in Switzerland recruiting me, so I'll be okay. But I'm worried about the country that gave me so much opportunities. I'm so grateful to America. I came in and I discovered my passion. I was able to do all this research, a lot of it based on public funding. And to see this being dismantled, I think is very disheartening. But I'm hopeful that it's something that we can come back from soon. I think there's signs that things will hopefully get better. And we all have to do our parts to make sure it does.
Tell me a little bit, tell me a little bit about your relationship with Armenia. I mean, you have your roots there. As I said in the beginning, it's a country that has been through a lot, a people that has been through a lot. You've never lived there, but you have visited. How's your relationship with the mother country?
It's a bit complicated. So I have such a immigrant profile, right? I'm Armenian, born in Lebanon, came to U.S. So I feel affiliations to all of these. But I also often say that once I worked in a science lab, I felt like scientists are my tribe. So that's kind of my now primary affiliation, I would say. It's multicultural. It's a wonderful community. But Armenia is very special to me because I grew up Armenian. I told it's my native language, and especially I have to say after the Nobel. So I was the first Armenian origin person to win a Nobel Prize, and so the country was so proud. And I got an invitation from the Prime Minister, visited there, had a wonderful time. They even issued a stamp with my face on it.
Wow!
So, and so that kind of that's wonderful actually to see a country that's not very rich but still celebrates science so strongly. And so I tried to give back. I've helped form a committee of scientists from abroad to advise the Prime Minister on how to prioritize science funding given their small budget. So yeah, it's a special thing, I think, to have that origin.
Awesome. So last question I wanted to ask you, what time do you play the guitar between all this?
I don't play the guitar. My son plays
really?
the guitar. I play the trumpet, but very badly. And
Do you guys have some sort of a band ensemble or something?
we had a band at some point, a jazz band in my workplace. Again, I was the worst musician, and I've done only one public concert, and it was terrible, absolutely terrible.
Well, thank you very much, and we hope to hear some questions from the audience. Aquí, primera fila. Y luego hay alguien por allá atrás, no sé.
Aló. Bueno, algunos de los temas que se trataron fue que para todos estos estudios científicos de investigación se necesitan dos palabras, paciencia y resiliencia. Pero yo también pienso que es importante el tema de la disciplina, así que me gustaría saber cuáles son tus rutinas diarias, cuál es el hábito cotidiano que tienes como para haber logrado esos objetivos de largo plazo que se pudiesen materializar en algún momento de la vida.
I heard patience and resilience.
Sí,
So,
he wants to know if what can you say about patience and well, resilience. It's also important, but what about patience in your work? How do you organize yourself to be orderly working?
Thank you. I talked about patience. I think science can be very frustrating for so many people. Many people I see that leave science have problems because they are very interested in the question, but there's again so much failure in science. One of my colleagues actually wrote a whole book about failure and how society looks at failure in a bad way, but in science, failure is important, is part of the process, and you can't do without it. And so you can't withstand all that failure without being patient. With respect to how I structure my day, just like the number of travels, I have my rules that I've developed over the years, and one of the most important ones for me is surprises people, and that is not to be too busy. I feel like if you're very busy running from one task to another, your creativity goes down, and so you have to leave time to read, to think. Most of my best ideas in science have come while I'm running or hiking or walking. And so it's important to realize that and to carve out time for these kind of things on the daily routine.
Hello, Ardem. Well, first, pretty grateful that you decided to visit Chile. I guess people with huge brains who decide to share their knowledge to other countries is pretty awesome. So I'm pretty happy for this opportunity. So also, I wanted to ask you something that is related a little bit about your research, but not directly to it, but rather than about the competency of the research team that you need to face. For example, I read Jennifer Doudna from Water Isaacson, a biography, which touched this topic a little bit about how the competency and the rivalry from the research to be the first one to achieve that goal is pretty important to actually achieve the recognition that you wanted. I wonder if you found a little bit of that rivalry in when you decided to research and discover your findings.
And the rivalry between scientists, and he puts the example of Jennifer Doudna and the whole CRISPR.
Yeah, in science we talk a lot about competition because when there's a question that's unanswered, more than one lab will identify it, and they're all working to find the solution. And just like failure, I feel like competition is often looked at as a bad thing, right? And for example, for the Nobel Prize, we David Julius and myself shared it, and at least for the temperature activated channels, we were competitors. So we were actually publishing at the same time. We were wondering if they're going to beat us, and in my mind, it was a kind of a negative thing at the time. But later, when you get recognized together and you realize that, you know, one of the number one important things in science is to replicate. So if I publish something and then another lab finds the same thing using completely independent approach, that's when you start believing that this is really true. And so often competition can turn into replication. And at the end, again, I just realized that the two labs enabled each other. So instead of thinking of it as a competition, if you think about it as enabling each other, it's a wonderful thing. So I have a different perspective now about it than before.
Hello, hello, hello. Ahí está. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. Out here. I wanted to ask if you had any tips for aspiring scientists, basically related to the either networking or the social side of science. What I mean is somebody who's, for example, starting a bachelor's degree or finishing one and wants to start their actual career in science. Try to join a lab, try to find professors that are interested in working with them. How did you go through that process? And if you have any tips for somebody who's trying to go into that field, trying to start studying and trying to, you know, get their own doctorate, etc.
I mean, I was clueless, right? So I told you I worked in a lab for a different reason than what it ended up being important. And so I think about this a lot, is how lucky I am in a way to find the career that I'm enjoy so much and I'm good at. And I think about it how it happened by accident. And I don't know if AI in the future will help us say, oh, you're going to be a good physicist, you should do that or not. But to me, it happened by luck. But at the same time, when I remember how I got my first job in the laboratory that I talked about, at the time there was no email. And so I called 20 professors and asked if they can work for them for free in the lab. And everyone said, no, I don't want to take anyone. And then the last one was Dr. Judy Laniel, and she was about to say no too, and then asked, what's your GPA, which means what's your grade? And I had good grade, not like excellent, but very good grades. And she heard that, she's like, okay, come talk to me tomorrow. And initially, you know, started working for free, and then I did well, so they hired me. So that's what the, you know, resilience and trying hard for what you want comes in. I think, you know, this idea that I needed to work in the lab, there was no advertising for job openings, but calling 30 labs and one of them working is the kind of thing that I encourage you to do. Find out what your passion is in, and just don't give up after that. Keep trying, do things differently, you know, stand out, and then you'll have a great career, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ardem. That's here. Thanks for sharing your story. After a great discovery, you know, there's a lot of things to do. Yeah, going into the specific, to the details. And I have seen that you are now going and looking what's happened with sensation inside the body, not only with the external world. But what is the next question? What basically is driving you, like the next big question, open question that you want to answer, apart from going into the details of this great field or idea that you already discovered?
So two directions. One of them, actually, I think we're getting very interested in trying to translate this discovery. So we're looking for a small molecule drug-like potential future medicines for pain. And so we want to translate this basic finding into more health-related to benefit humanity, hopefully. The other one, I think that, you know, when we started looking for pressure sensors, they were thought to be important just for a few things. Touch, pain, hearing, that was all kind of. And since we found these piezos that are, professional mechanosensors, we're kind of finding out that so many other cells use this signal for biology, and when things go wrong for disease, that I think in 5 to 10 years I'll be able to tell you that pressure sensing was much more important for biology. We found, for example, that immune cells, macrophages that go around and eat debris and other things, people never thought that they pressure sense. But if you look at a video of a cell doing this, it looks very mechanical. It extends arms, touches things, lets go. And so now we're finding pressure sensing is very important for this biology that nobody thought about. So stories like this, I think, we'll find the next 10 years that will change the way we think about pressure sensing. So beyond sensory neurobiology, the body is using pressure sensing in every aspect that we've looked at right now. And I think we're going to find more.
Thanks.
Hi, here. Over here, I'm Carla. She's my little daughter. She's Victoria. She's 8 years old. And hopefully, I hope she will be a big scientist. Now she's an artist, but she would like to know, what was your main passion when you were a kid? And if you, when you were a kid, think about, I don't know, respond a big answer of the scientist or something like that?
There are some scientists who say from the first day they took things apart and built and were very curious about engineering, building, and science. I wasn't quite like that. My big passion was basketball, which I guess I didn't realize how short I was going to be, and I had big dreams in that area. That didn't work out. So for me, it was a very slow process. I was actually not an excellent student either till later in high school. So we call that late bloomers in US. And so I think that should give hopes to everyone who doesn't feel too special right now, is that things could happen, and everybody has their own trajectory, their own path with different timing. And so and I think there's lots in common between science and art. So she should just do what she loves, and it'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, here. So you mentioned you conformed a commission to help the Armenian government to prioritize how they spend money into science. I'm curious to know what are the main thoughts about how to spend money when you have short resources to have the best value out of it in science.
So my specialty is biomedical research, and so for example, one of the things that Armenia was trying to do, have this institute on neurodegenerative disease. Alzheimer, Parkinson, these are diseases that there's no good cures for, and there's a lot of interest on it. But I think, this is my opinion that I'm telling the committee, that United States with billions of budget has spent so much on these topics and hasn't made a huge dent yet. Of course, United States should double down and invest even more. But for little Armenia to make a difference in there is, I would say, not very likely. But Armenia is very good at computer science. They already have a thriving tech industry. And for example, I think that there's a field of bioinformatics. We're in biology generating vast amounts of data on genes, on disease associations, and we need lots of in silico computer AI to look at all this data. And the relative cost of doing this compared to bench science actual experiments much cheaper. And as I said, Armenia's kind of has the computer background, so I'm pushing for expertise in that, and they've actually started a bioinformatics institute, and I'm hoping that they grow it. Just one example.
This is gonna be the last two questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. as a grandmother, I'm worried about my grandchildren growing up with the electromagnetism and the cell phone. I don't worry about content. I worry about, can you maybe share your take on, we're going to be flooded with 5G soon enough in Chile?
This is not my expertise, so you shouldn't listen to me. But from what I've seen, those are the least of your concerns. So you shouldn't worry about 5G.
And electromagnetism in general is not bad for the formation of these young cells at an early.
Again, not my expertise, but not the general electromagnetism that's around you. I don't think that's something you should worry about. But don't listen to me.
Okay. Hi, Ardem. My name is Claudio. Thank you for coming and show us your experience. I wanna ask you. Sometimes research and study can be an obsession. How you combine this with family?
Yes, work-life balance. There is a culture in science of working hard. And when I was a graduate student, my wife was also a graduate student. We used to work very hard, stay late at night, and I think it's important to do that because there's so much failure in science. You have to give the time for things to work. But at some point, you also have to realize that I've always prioritized this life-work balance. I every day, for example, used to walk with my son to his bus to go to school, and even the day of the Nobel announcement, I still did it. Took the time to do it, just because I think that's important. It's important to keep that kind of routine. But it's science. It's also once you think about it, that even more important than hard work is hard thinking. This is something Jim Watson said a while ago, and people sometimes confuse the two. So, for my lab to be successful, it's more important for me to think hard than to work hard. And for me to think hard, I can do that while I'm spending time with my family, while I'm running, while I'm doing anything else. And so each position is different requirements, whether you're a student, professor, or researcher. And I'm a big fan of this balance because, again, I think I talked about, not being too busy, and that all goes in the same kind of. I feel like you can do it all. It's of course more difficult for women, to have children, etc. And it's important for society to make it very easy for everyone to do science and to create situations where it's not hardship or people don't fall behind because of their unique circumstances.
There's a last question over
I think this is the last question. Ardem, again, thank you for being here. It's sad that this is the last question because it's kind of a sad note, but are you worried at all that your discovery could become like, again, let me reformulate. I think one of today's biggest problems is addiction, either to pharma or to social media or food or anything else. And I think it's because people don't know in today's age don't know how to deal with pain. So do you think that your discovery could become something bad that big pharma could profit from, or are you do you expect it to become like something that will help humanity?
I would say the opposite, right? So the leading medication in pain is opioids, which cause addiction. And so we're trying to develop pain medicines that don't have that addictive component to it. And, the pharmaceutical industry, of course, can improve in many different ways. But I feel like society sometimes looks at them as this evil empire. And I don't want to minimize that lots of room for improvement. But these are also the institutions that are giving you all these medicines that we all enjoy to become healthy longer in life. And so I'm not worried about that I'm actually excited about to give alternatives to find medicines that are not addictive.
Okay, now this is the last question.
Thank you very much, Ardem. I am very interested in how to build bridges between the arts, the humanities, and the science. So I was wondering if there is any concept or image that may be useful for you to describe what you do or your field.
Maybe
I don't know.
Maybe your tattoo?
Yeah, that's a very good idea.
I think beyond my tattoo, I really like what you're
Maybe
saying.
some people here haven't seen your tattoo.
Yeah.
So for arts and sciences, I think more interaction is very important. Yesterday, I showed, so when I was at Davos last year, before I talked, without an introduction, this musician came up blindfolded and played a violin piece. And the whole idea was that to highlight how important proprioception, this sense of pressure sensing that's depending on our channel, is. And that's one great example of people immediately then identify what is proprioception, why is it important and good. I'm trying to do more things like this, and again, I would love to have some ideas. I'm going to Portugal in a few weeks, where something I didn't talk about. I'm very interested in mouthfeel, tactile sensation in the mouth, and we're having a collaboration with scientists, winemakers, and restaurant chefs to talk about food and wine from the culinary perspective and from the scientific perspective. There's so much overlap that will increase interest in science as well as the arts, and we need to be more creative in bringing this all together.
Thank you very much.
You're going to get a lot of bottles now from Chilean wine, and I bet you. Well, thank you very much for being here, for being so generous, and this is very